In 1975, you could do things in Chicago that would get you a fine, a lawsuit, or a call from the city today. Not because people were reckless, but because the rules had not arrived yet. The permits, the liability waivers, the designated zones, the enforcement. None of it existed, and some of what you could do freely back then turns out to have been the best part of living here. Number 1. Maxwell Street Sundays. On any given Sunday morning in 1973, you could walk 9 city blocks and buy almost anything from almost anyone. No receipt, no record, no system. Taking a cut. Maxwell Street. Jewish merchants, black vendors, Mexican families, Polish grandmothers, guys selling electronics and packaging nobody had ever seen in any legitimate store. A bar called Cheat You Fair, a bone-in pork chop at Jim's Original on the corner. The merchandise was charitably of uncertain origin. Everybody knew. Nobody asked. The old Chicago Police Academy sat on the adjacent block for decades, and the arrangement was understood by all parties involved. 800 vendors, 20,000 visitors on a single Sunday. In 1994, the city closed it. UIC needed the land for a $525 million campus expansion. Number 2, drink a beer outside. Chicago's Open Container Ordinance, Statute 84030, makes it illegal to drink alcohol on any public sidewalk, street, or park. Today, a warm Saturday on the lakefront with a can of anything gets you a citation. In the 1970s, that law existed on paper, but enforcement was minimal and inconsistent. On the south and west sides, drinking on the stoop was a summer institution. You pulled a chair out, you opened something cold, you watched the block. It was not considered a crime. It was considered being home. The city of Chicago established its original law against drinking in public in 1953, specifically designed to move what they called bottle gangs off street corners, which meant, in practice, it was used to move black men off corners in certain neighborhoods. The enforcement was never evenly applied. In the 1970s, the gap between what the ordinance said and what actually happened on any given block in Bridgeport or Pilsen or Bronzeville was wide enough to drive a truck through. Number 3, ride without a seatbelt. Illinois did not have a mandatory seatbelt law until July 1, 1985. Before that date, the decision to buckle was entirely yours. You could put 5 kids in the back of a station wagon, no belts, and drive to Indiana, legal, common, completely unremarkable. Pickup trucks were the specific Chicago ritual here. Southeast Side, late spring, some uncle's truck, kids in the bed on the way to a picnic at Wolf Lake or the dunes, wind, exhaust, the smell of steel from the mills. If you asked your parents about it now, they'd either say it was fine or they'd change the subject. Both reactions tell you something. Today in Illinois, you cannot legally ride in the bed of a pickup truck at all. Seatbelt laws apply to the entire vehicle, and truck beds have none. A first offense is a minimum $25 fine. More importantly, it no longer happens. An entire category of summer experience has been quietly regulated out of existence. Correctly, probably, but gone. Hospital waiting rooms, L platforms, the break room at the plant, the bleachers at Comiskey, every bar, every restaurant, every bowling alley in the city. In the 1970s, if you were indoors in Chicago, there was a reasonable chance someone near you was smoking. Illinois's Clean Indoor Air Act didn't reach full effect until 2008. Before that, the question wasn't where you could smoke. It was whether the place you were in had bothered to designate a non-smoking section and whether anyone paid attention to it if they had. The air in Chicago is measurably better. Bartenders and waitstaff live longer. Lung cancer rates in the city have dropped. These are not debatable outcomes. What's gone is something more specific, the physical atmosphere, literally, of a Chicago bar in January. Heat cranked, everyone inside for the duration, coat on the stool, glass in hand. the air thick and close and visibly wrong. Number 5, build with whatever you had. In the 1970s, an enormous portion of Chicago's housing stock, particularly the 2-flats and 3-flats built before 1940, contained materials that would trigger federal abatement requirements today. Lead paint on every surface, asbestos insulation wrapped around the pipes. Both visible, both accessible, both normal. OSHA was established in 1971 and began setting federal exposure limits. EPA banned spray applied asbestos products in 1973. Lead-based paint in residential construction was banned federally in 1978, but the transition was slow and enforcement was slower. What this meant, practically, you could renovate your own kitchen in 1976 and sand down every wall and sweep the dust into a bag and throw it in the alley without a single permit, a single inspection, or a single notification to any authority. Today, that same project, in a building built before 1978, requires certified contractors, specific disposal protocols, and mandatory disclosure to anyone who enters the space. The dust that South and West Side kids grew up breathing in those apartments is a documented public health disaster. The regulations that eventually arrived were correct and necessary. They also arrived decades too late for an entire generation. Number 6, walk-up Wrigley tickets. Before the renovation, before the rooftop licensing, and the premium tiers and the dynamic pricing algorithm that adjust your seat cost based on the opponent's record and the weather forecast. You could walk up to the Wrigley Field box office an hour before a game and pay $2.50 for a bleacher seat. Cash. No app, no service fee, no wristband. The Cubs were bad enough in the 70s that this was almost always an option, which turned out to matter. It made Wrigley a neighborhood park in the literal sense. People from Lakeview walked over after work. Kids came on bikes. The ballpark was embedded in daily North Side life in a way that had nothing to do with whether the team was winning. The renovation completed in 2019 added seats and amenities and permanently removed the walk-up economy. Wrigley is a better ballpark now by almost every physical measure. It's also behind a pricing structure that makes a spontaneous Tuesday afternoon bleacher decision essentially impossible for anyone on an hourly wage. Number 7, Southeast Side steel work. In the 1970s, you could still walk into a hiring hall in South Chicago and come out with a union job at a steel mill. U.S. Steel's South Works employed more than 20,000 people at its peak. Not shifts, but people within walking distance of the neighborhoods where their families lived. On March 27, 1980, Wisconsin Steel closed without notifying its 3,300 workers. Their final paychecks bounced. Chase Manhattan Bank informed them in April after the fact that the accounts were empty. No severance, no warning. 1 in 6 former Wisconsin Steel workers died in the years following from causes tied directly to the aftermath: suicide, substance abuse, and health problems from a decade without decent insurance. 25,000 steel manufacturing jobs in Chicago disappeared in a single decade. The neighborhoods that were built around those mills, South Chicago, South Deering, East Side, Hegewisch, have not recovered. That's not a historical observation. That's the current condition of those places right now. Number 8, let kids roam unsupervised. This one is not a law exactly. There is no ordinance in Chicago that specifies what age a child can walk to a corner store alone. But the legal and social infrastructure around childhood has shifted so completely since the 1970s that what was completely normal then now triggers calls to the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services. In 1974, on the North Side, a 10-year-old could take the L alone to a Cubs game, and nobody, not the parents, not the neighbors, not the other passengers, would consider this a problem. 11-year-olds ran errands on foot across neighborhoods. 12-year-olds worked summer jobs that weren't officially on any payroll. The city hasn't changed the laws. It changed the social consensus around what constitutes neglect. That shift has produced safer children in measurable ways, and a generation of adults with measurably less experience navigating the world without a parent watching. Number 9. Lakefront fishing, no permit. Small one, genuinely small. But it mattered to a specific generation of South and West Side kids who did not have money for organized recreation. You took the L to the lakefront. You had a rod or you borrowed one. You dropped a line and sat for 2 hours. No permit, no designated zone, no fee, no wristband. Illinois fishing licenses have been required since before the 1970s, technically, but enforcement on the Chicago lakefront, particularly in neighborhoods where the fishermen were Black and Latino kids, was inconsistent in one specific direction. The lakefront zoning and access regulations that formalized through the 80s and 90s changed the physical setup of the shoreline. Designated areas, signage, enforcement patterns, the lake is the same. The regulations are also still there. Number 10. Navigate on instinct. No GPS. No real-time tracker. No app. You knew the L lines, you knew roughly how long the bus took, and you knew the shortcuts your father's father had figured out in some other decade. When you got it wrong, you asked someone at a corner, from a car window, or inside a store. That exchange, brief and unrepeatable, with a stranger who knew the block you did not, happened thousands of times a day across Chicago, and produced a texture of public life that constant digital navigation has made almost completely unnecessary. Nobody regulated this away. The technology made it obsolete. The outcome is the same. You can live in this city now for years without ever needing another person to tell you where you are. If you grew up in any version of this city, subscribe. We are going further back every week. Number 11. Buy anything, no questions. Back to Maxwell Street for a moment because the hubcap angle deserves its own entry. The market operated openly adjacent to a police facility for decades because Chicago in the 1970s ran on an understood economy of informal tolerance. You didn't ask where something came from, the seller didn't explain. A price was named, a price was paid, and both parties moved on. This applied to merchandise. It applied to certain services. It applied to arrangements between building owners and city inspectors and aldermen that produced outcomes nobody wanted officially documented. This wasn't unique to Chicago, but Chicago had elevated the informal economy to something close to a civic institution. The phrase "Chicago way" did not enter the language by accident. Number 12. Drink in the car, the person in the passenger seat. The can between the legs on a long drive, the open bottle on the floor of the back seat on a summer road trip to the Wisconsin Dells. Illinois's open container vehicle law arrived with the federal pressure of the 1980s. States that didn't enact them risked losing federal highway funding. Before that, the passenger seat beer on a Friday afternoon drive home from work was not a crime. It was a Friday afternoon. This is not an argument for bringing it back. Drunk driving killed roughly 55,000 Americans annually in the late 1970s, a number that has dropped by more than half since. The regulations worked. What they also did was close a specific window of American car culture that Chicago participated in fully. The vehicle, as a moving extension of the living room, where the rules of the road and the rules of the house had not yet been formally separated. That window is shut now legally and permanently. The reason it is shut is written in the fatality statistics of every year before it closed.